The rain came down in sheets, drumming against steel hulls and wooden decks as thousands of men waited in silence. Somewhere in the darkness of the English Channel, engines idled, rifles were checked one last time, and letters, some never to be sent, were folded into pockets. No one spoke of victory. No one spoke of fear. But everyone understood the same truth. By dawn, history would demand its price. It was 1944. On the Eastern Front, Nazi Germany was bleeding, pushed relentlessly back by Soviet forces. Yet, Adolf Hitler believed time was still on his side. If the Western Allies failed to strike decisively, Germany might yet survive. The question that haunted Berlin was not if the invasion would come, but where. Across the Channel, Britain had become an armed camp. For months, Allied soldiers trained, rehearsed, and waited. Generals argued over beaches, weather forecasts, and the unforgiving mathematics of war. One wrong decision, one storm, one delay could doom an entire generation. This was not merely an invasion plan. It was a gamble on a scale the world had never seen. A single morning that would determine the fate of Europe and perhaps the future of the modern world. The idea of returning to continental Europe had haunted British leaders since the dark days of 1940. Winston Churchill understood a hard truth long before many others were willing to admit it. Nazi Germany could not be defeated from the air alone, nor solely on distant battlefields. Sooner or later, Allied soldiers would have to fight their way back onto the shores of Europe and pay for every mile in blood. But how that return should happen was far from clear. Early attempts to test the waters revealed just how dangerous such an operation could be. In December 1941, British commandos struck the Norwegian Lofoten Islands, destroying German facilities and probing coastal defenses. The raid was small, but it offered valuable intelligence and forced Hitler to divert troops to guard Europe's long shoreline. The lesson was far harsher 8 months later at Dieppe. In August 1942, Canadian and British forces launched a bold daylight assault on the heavily defended French port. Almost everything that could go wrong did. Landing craft were raked by machine gun fire, infantry were pinned down on the shingle beaches, and supporting tanks became hopelessly bogged down. Few soldiers reached the seawall. Fewer still made it beyond. By the end of the day, more than 3,000 Allied troops were dead, wounded, or captured. Dieppe was a disaster, but it was also a brutal education. Allied planners drew two conclusions that would shape every decision that followed. First, a direct assault on a German-held port was suicidal. Second, any future invasion of Europe would require meticulous preparation on a scale never before attempted. Churchill took those lessons to heart. When Allied leaders met in Washington in April 1943, the question was no longer whether an invasion would take place, but when. President Franklin D. Roosevelt and Churchill agreed that the assault must come in 1944, giving the Allies time to gather overwhelming strength and avoid another Dieppe. While the Allies planned, Germany prepared. Since 1941, Hitler had ordered the construction of the Atlantic Wall, a vast chain of bunkers, gun emplacements, minefields, and obstacles stretching from Denmark to the Spanish border. Beaches were wired, mined, and reinforced. Hitler boasted that no enemy would ever break through. Yet beneath that confidence lay a fatal weakness. Europe's coastline was simply too long to defend everywhere at once. And where to concentrate forces would become one of the most consequential strategic debates of the war. While the Allies debated where and when to strike, the German High Command wrestled with a problem that had no perfect solution. Adolf Hitler believed Western Europe could be transformed into an impregnable fortress. His answer was the Atlantic Wall, a vast, concrete manifestation of fear and ambition. From the beaches of Denmark to the Spanish border, bunkers rose from sand and stone, bristling with artillery, machine guns, and mines. Yet even Hitler could not escape geography. No army had enough men to defend 2,000 miles of coastline equally. At the center of the German dilemma stood two men with sharply different visions. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, overall commander in the West, favored flexibility. He wanted to hold powerful panzer divisions inland, near Paris, ready to strike once the true invasion site revealed itself. To Rundstedt, committing tanks too early risked wasting Germany's last mobile reserves. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel saw things very differently. Having faced Allied air power in North Africa, Rommel was deeply skeptical that armored forces could move freely once the invasion began. He believed Allied aircraft would shred any counterattack long before it reached the beaches. After inspecting the Atlantic Wall firsthand, Rommel reached a blunt conclusion. The defenses were uneven and often incomplete. If the Allies gained a foothold, the war in the West would be lost. The only hope, he argued, was to smash the invasion at the water's edge. Hitler attempted to reconcile the irreconcilable. Some panzer units were placed near the coast, others held back in reserve, but ultimate authority over their release rested with Hitler himself. It was a compromise that satisfied no one and weakened Germany everywhere. Too few tanks stood ready near the beaches, and too few reserves could respond quickly. Across the Channel, Allied planners faced their own strategic crossroads. General Frederick Morgan, tasked with designing the invasion, narrowed the options to two: Pas de Calais or Normandy. Calais offered the shortest crossing and the most direct route into Germany. It was also exactly where the Germans expected an invasion to come. Morgan chose deception. Normandy, though riskier, offered surprise. It was a gamble that placed immense faith in secrecy, planning, and misdirection. To make it work, the Allies launched an unprecedented intelligence and deception effort. French resistance fighters monitored German defenses. Reconnaissance aircraft photographed every inch of coastline. Men crept ashore at night to collect sand samples, testing whether tanks could even land. From artificial mulberry harbors to fuel pipelines laid across the seabed, the Allies reimagined what an invasion could look like. War, in this moment, became a contest of imagination as much as firepower. And as both sides prepared for the inevitable clash, the fate of Western Europe began to hinge on decisions made far from the battlefield. The final obstacle before the invasion was not German steel or concrete, but the sky itself. As early June approached, violent storms swept across the English Channel. Rain lashed the airfields, waves battered the landing craft, and visibility collapsed. For days, Allied commanders waited, knowing that every delay risked discovery, and every wrong decision risked catastrophe. On the night of the 5th of June 1944, the burden fell squarely on Dwight D. Eisenhower. Weather forecasts offered only a narrow window of improvement. It would not be ideal, it would not be safe, but it was the only chance. After hours of debate, Eisenhower made his decision. Let's go. With those words, Operation Overlord was set in motion. Shortly after midnight on June 6, British gliders slipped silently over the Normandy coast. Released in darkness, they plunged toward their target's vital bridges over the Caen Canal. Within minutes, airborne troops were fighting at close quarters, securing objectives that would protect the invasion's eastern flank. To the west, American paratroopers dropped into fields and hedgerows around Sainte-Mère-Église. Many landed far from their intended zones, but small scattered units fought on, sowing confusion among German defenders. As dawn broke, German sentries along the Normandy coast saw a sight beyond imagination. Out of the mist emerged an armada of warships and landing craft stretching to the horizon. Allied naval guns opened fire, hammering bunkers and gun positions. Above them, waves of aircraft roared overhead, striking roads, batteries, and communication lines. At 6:30 a.m., the first assault waves hit the beaches. At Utah Beach, American forces landed off course, but into weaker defenses. Within hours, they linked up with airborne troops and pushed inland. At Omaha Beach, the situation was terrifyingly different. High bluffs dominated the shoreline. Machine gun fire ripped through the landing craft. Many amphibious tanks sank before reaching shore. Men were pinned down on open sand with nowhere to go. For a moment, the invasion teetered on the edge of disaster. Yet small groups of soldiers found gaps, scaled cliffs, and silenced German positions one by one. Against all odds, Omaha held. Further east, British and Canadian forces landed at Gold, Juno, and Sword beaches. Here, the strange-looking armored vehicles known as Hobart's Funnies proved their worth, clearing mines, bridging obstacles, and smashing through defenses that would have stopped ordinary troops cold. The Germans reacted too slowly. Erwin Rommel was away, convinced the weather ruled out an invasion. Field commanders hesitated, waiting for permission to release panzer reserves. Hitler slept. By the time orders came, the moment had passed. By nightfall, more than 100,000 Allied soldiers stood on French soil. The beachheads were fragile, incomplete, and soaked in blood, but they existed. The greatest seaborne invasion in history had succeeded, and the war in Western Europe had entered a new, irreversible phase. By late August 1944, the battle for Normandy had reached its brutal conclusion. American forces, now led in the field by General George S. Patton, surged south and east, moving faster than German commanders believed possible. British and Canadian troops pressed from the north. Caught between them, the German army began to collapse. Near the small French town of Falaise, the trap finally closed. What became known as the Falaise Pocket was not a single battle, but a prolonged slaughter. Tens of thousands of German soldiers were killed, wounded, or captured as Allied aircraft and artillery pummeled retreating columns. Roads were choked with wrecked vehicles and abandoned equipment. The once feared German army in Western Europe ceased to function as a coherent force. At the same time, Allied troops landed on the southern coast of France, advancing rapidly up the Rhone Valley. Resistance crumbled. French civilians poured into the streets to welcome liberators they had waited 4 long years to see. Paris rose in defiance, and by the end of the summer, the city was free. In less than 3 months, Nazi Germany had lost its grip on France. Yet D-Day and the Normandy campaign were never just about territory. They marked a turning point in the nature of modern warfare. Victory was achieved, not by a single heroic charge, but by coordination between nations, services, technologies, and millions of individuals doing their duty under unimaginable pressure. Logistics mattered as much as courage. Deception proved as powerful as firepower. Leadership, especially at moments of uncertainty, became decisive. For the United States, Normandy confirmed a new reality. America was no longer a distant power drawn reluctantly into war. It had become a central architect of the post-war world, bearing both the responsibility and the consequences of global leadership. The beaches of Normandy are quiet now. The guns are silent. But the lessons remain. They speak of preparation over arrogance, cooperation over division, and the terrible cost of delayed action. So the question endures. When future generations face moments of equal consequence, will they remember what was learned on those shores in 1944? If this history matters to you, if you believe the past still shapes the choices of the present, join the conversation. Share your thoughts below, and subscribe to continue exploring the battles that forged the world we live in today.